Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 120th episode of the Diverse Minds podcast. And it's still Disability History Month. So on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about how to support staff who may need reasonable or workplace adjustments to help them thrive at work. And I've decided to make an episode on this topic because managers really do have a key role in developing best practice in relation to disability support for their team. And public sector organisations in the UK really should be acting in an anticipatory fashion, which is all about people and organisations planning or undertaking the planning for the needs of disabled people as a whole, as opposed to simply responding on a case-by-case basis. And if you listen to last week's episode about universal design and why it's so important, the two link together. Now, this principle can be applied to all organisations across the globe. And it is about putting the social model of disability at the heart of this. And the social model states that disability is caused by the way society is organised, rather than by a person's impairment, difference, disability. It looks at ways of removing barriers that restrict life choices for disabled people. And when these barriers are removed, disabled people can be independent and equal in society with choice and control over their own lives. And again, you'll recognise this theme from last week's podcast episode. And in some cases, a person may only become aware that they have a disability after experiencing difficulties with certain tasks or activities. Often individuals with long-standing unseen disabilities, such as mental ill health or dyslexia, may only disclose this when they have settled into a job. Their primary concern may be that they're not offered a job, so things are kept quiet. And this is an example of disability because it's the barriers that are presented and someone can't disclose this or be open about it. They then might struggle with certain ways that tasks need to be done because they need adjustments in the workplace and they haven't been met. So in the UK, the Equality Act 2010 defines disability as any condition that substantially interferes with a person's ability to carry day-to-day activities and lasts or is expected to last for more than 12 months. Examples of conditions that are considered a disability, I'll go into this in a bit more detail, but let's first of all cover normal day-to-day activities. And they are things like mobility, doing something with your hands, anything at all. That could be writing, that could be picking up a phone. Physical coordination, continence, so being able to control your bladder and bowels. Ability to lift, carry, or move everyday objects. Now, these don't have to be heavy objects. Like I said, it could be pens, it could be cups of tea, it could be notepads. It is not about manual handling, although, of course, if people do develop injuries as a result of manual handling, that does need to be taken into account. Speech, hearing, or eyesight, and memory or ability to concentrate, learn, or understand. And this definition, a disability is any condition which impairs a person's ability to carry out day-to-day activities. And so we're looking at sensory impairments, such as those things affecting sight or hearing loss. Some visual impairments are automatically deemed to be a disability. Physical impairments or illnesses that affect mobility, dexterity, or control of movement. So we're talking about wheelchairs, crutches, arthritis, multiple sclerosis, or stroke. Developmental conditions that they used to be called, now we think of it as neurodivergent conditions. So dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism spectrum, progressive diseases such as motor neuron disease, Parkinson's, muscular dystrophy, forms of dementia, and lupus. Also illnesses with impairments with fluctuating or recurring effects such as multiple sclerosis, ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, sickle cell anemia, epilepsy and diabetes. Mental health conditions such as depression, anxiety, eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar, and some self-harming behaviours and potentially personality disorders. HIV and AIDS, but HIV infection and AIDS from the point of diagnosis, even if there is no adverse effect on day-to-day living. So this is really important. This is about stigma and discrimination that people who are living with HIV AIDS will experience or may well experience, especially when they disclose the condition. Cancer from the point of diagnosis, again, even when there's no adverse effect on day-to-day living in that moment. And other long-term illnesses that significantly impair a person's ability to function mentally or physically. And this could be due to the effects of illness or the effects or demands of treatment and needing to attend hospital appointments or taking debilitating or time-consuming treatment, and also facial disfigurements. Now, I think the list could be longer than that. And of course, case law shapes things. It's important to remember that menopause, when people are going through the menopause and they experience very severe symptoms that can have an impact on their mental health, their well-being, bleeding, and other conditions, this can also be classed as a disability. So case law will dictate, and this is just to give you a sense. Now, this isn't necessarily a checklist, but this is to give you a sense of how broad the category is, which means it's all about making sure that people are taken into consideration and employers have to do things to support disabled staff. Often what happens is managers get hung up on this 12 months, oh, you're going to have this depression for 12 months or not. And I would say, listen, let's just make workplace adjustments and support someone. Maybe the depression will be short term. Maybe the depression will last longer than 12 months. But actually, we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can in the workplace, because often the worst thing for someone, not always, but maybe they want periods of time off sick. But work is very much rehabilitation. So if someone's not well, they might not be able to do the job in exactly the same way they did prior to a diagnosis or a period of being unwell. But work is really valuable for people, and it enables them to have an identity and carry on and have a sense of routine. So being signed off work indefinitely isn't always the answer. Now, of course, there are times where that needs to happen if someone is indeed experiencing time-consuming and very painful or debilitating treatment. But remember, no two people are the same, or no two people have exactly the same sort of ability, disability. And it can, of course, vary according to the type of activity in which a person is participating or the environment in which that person is carrying out the activity. And it's likely that we'll all experience some kind of reduced functioning at some stage of our lifetimes. So an example could be noisy environments. It might just be overwhelming, especially when we've been in lockdown and it's been a real transition to then enter a really noisy space. If the light's really dim, that can affect all of our eyesight. Anyone who has experienced long COVID and recovery and the effects of that, it's been incredibly debilitating. And so the first thing is that it's essential to speak to the member of staff and avoid making any assumptions. Individuals are usually the experts on the effects of their disability and how they are impacted. So they may not be able to tell you exactly what they need, particularly if it's a new condition, but they are best placed to tell you how it's making them feel, their energy levels, which tasks that they feel more comfortable with, which tasks they feel less comfortable with in that moment. And ask your member of staff if and how their disability could be supported effectively in the workplace. And often it's very straightforward and simple things. So if someone has started to take medication and they feel very groggy, they might say, well, I'd like to start work at 10 o'clock, so I have a little bit more time to do things. And I find by the afternoon, I'm much better and I'm happy to work 10 till 6 and not 8 till 4 or 9 till 5. And while you don't want to, as a manager, ask for in-depth information about medical history, because really, how relevant is that to us? And again, I've seen this in workplaces where managers and HR really, really go in for the individual in a very negative way and ask for reams and reams of medical information and really push that individual to put their private medical information into the public domain. Now, I don't really need a medical report if someone says to me, I'm experiencing, my eyesight's deteriorating and I'm experiencing poor eyesight. And as a result, I really need to think about how I work. What could I do with that medical information? What will it tell me? I'm not medically trained, but they've actually been really helpful and said, my eyesight's changing and things are looking quite different for me. So they might need screen magnification software. They might need a bigger screen on their computer. They might need to do less work on a computer. They might need someone to help them type up notes. I'm thinking out loud. If I were given a report on retina pigmentosa, for example, and I read it in detail, what really is that going to give me? That's not going to tell me what that staff member needs in the workplace. And I think so often there's just an overemphasis on the medical side without thinking about the practical side. So it may be that we have one document from a GP saying, yep, they've been diagnosed with this, they're being referred to a specialist. We can then have a discussion with the individual, and then we can then touch base with other organisations that can help us. So one could be the government's Access to Work scheme. The other one could be that we could have a conversation together with the member of staff with RNIB at Royal National Institute of the Blind that do support workplaces on equipment. They have a catalogue about equipment and things that we could order for the individual. Now, that's far more helpful, I think, than reams and reams of medical paperwork. Where does that go? How does it really help us? And it is about a common sense approach between a manager and a member of staff in respect of what might be helpful and possible. If you really want to get expert advice from a disability specialist or occupational health, it can be useful, but it's not always required. But if you feel that's the right way to go, then do speak to your workplace, specifically in large workplaces where you will probably have an occupational health centre contact and your HR team. So I'm really hoping that you're finding the content of this podcast interesting and useful and you want to keep up to date. Then why not join my bi-monthly newsletter? When you join up, you'll get and receive a copy of my ebook, The Mentally Healthy Leading Manager. And the link is in the show notes, but just in case, it's bit.ly/MHLMEBKLNK. Okay, so what can you do then if a member of your team or members of your team disclose or declare or self-identify that they have a disability, whether it's visible or invisible, whether it's one or multiple? Well, it's what I call putting workplace adjustments into play, known as reasonable adjustments in the legal world. It's the term that we would use for any adaptation that needs to be made in the workplace to ensure equal access and opportunity for your disabled member of staff. And adjustments, as I said earlier, are really about empowering any disabled staff member and preventing disadvantage compared to non-disabled staff. And they can include any sort of adaptation to working arrangements, environmental aspects of the workplace. And adjustments will vary according to the nature of the impairment, the disability, the effect of this on the person's work, and the type of work that they do. And of course, not all disabled staff will require workplace adjustments. In some cases, their job may be able to be carried out without requiring any adjustments. But it's really important prior to any decision being made that the member of staff communicates their needs and their preferred work style. And that's also crucial because often what I see as well is managers will say, oh, yeah, I've had someone with a visual impairment and they needed this, or I've had someone with a hearing impairment or from the deaf community and this is what they needed. Great, that's what that individual needed. You've also got to look at personality, role, and someone's work preference. If someone came into our office or our workspace tomorrow and told us, oh, no, you can't do it like that anymore. You have to change the way you work and you're not allowed to write lists. You have to put everything online. We'd probably find that quite annoying. So why would a member of staff who has declared, self-identified or disclosed a disability to you want that to be the case for them? So it's really for the member of staff to lead on this discussion. And for those who require an adjustment to enable them to fulfill their work duties, the adjustment may be very simple. It can be understanding that the person will carry out their work in a different way to other members in your team, and that's absolutely fine. So it is creating that open culture for discussion. I also wanted to pick up on the fact that I call it workplace adjustment and not reasonable adjustment, as is the legal term. So they are absolutely identical. But the reason I say workplace adjustment is what I have found is, again, managers and workplaces get so tied up with this word reasonable. It's not what you think is reasonable. It's about reasonableness in the eyes of the law. So no one's asking you. I think it would be incredibly rare to knock down a whole building. If you want to do that and go to use universal design and rebuild it, brilliant. But that is not what's expected. However, I have seen so many arguments around, well, I don't think it's reasonable that you have a height adjustable desk because it costs too much. Actually, if you're a big organization, that is a very reasonable adjustment if someone has chronic back pain or they need to stand for particular reasons. So let's not get caught up in reasonable being in the eyes of the manager. Let's think about workplace adjustments to enable people and empower people to do their job. And so I want to share some examples with you on this. So first of all, something like anxiety, or someone who has an anxiety disorder or has experienced anxiety. Maybe not so much the case now, but previously in the pandemic, traveling in rush hour in crowded conditions. So that might be the area of consideration for the line manager. Really easy adjustment is to allow flexible working, agile working to enable staff member to avoid peak periods of rush hour and time. It could be that someone has photosensitive epilepsy. So their epileptic seizures are triggered by lights flickering, flashing lights. So older computers, type of monitor may trigger these kinds of seizures in people with photosensitive epilepsy. Ensuring lights are in good working order. It might be that if they're working at home, you want to check in and make sure that they have everything they need, and inform any staff member prior to intense flash photography. Again, if you're having an online meeting and maybe the lights in someone's room are flickering, just being aware of that and having those conversations. Someone has a condition like lupus, which is an autoimmune disease, and the area of consideration might be around being able to physically be present at work in the case of flare-ups or pain or treatment. And lupus is a condition that does vary very much from individual to individual, and there can be a hereditary element to it as well. So it's definitely not one size fits all. Again, allowing flexible working, agile working, working from home to aid recovery. If they're going in for some treatment or they're going in for a checkup and they know those tests are quite invasive, what does that recovery time look like for them? Maybe they have to adapt their task for that particular time. Dyslexia. So depends again on someone's dyslexia profile, but let's say the area of consideration for this particular individual is when they have to take minutes at meetings, listening to the meetings and writing it all up, typing up agendas and having lots of meetings on their plate. Well, enabling certain meetings to be recorded simply for the purpose of typing up the notes. So letting them use something like a LiveScribe pen and installing something like Read and Write Gold software to facilitate these tasks. And these absolutely don't cost the earth. Severe back pain, I think that's something that many people have experienced over this pandemic period. So sitting for long periods of time, particularly sitting in chairs and at our kitchen tables and desks that are not good ergonomically. So sending over an ergonomic assessment checklist for someone, and most big organizations have that. And in fact, at the Health and Safety Executive, you can probably download some things if you're from a smaller organization, and looking at their workstation, thinking about height adjustable desks. Do you have grants that people can apply for if they can use that in their own homes? Regular standing or rest breaks, making sure people get up. And again, lots of these things are good for everyone. So someone might have declared, disclosed, self-identified a disability, but these things are practical and useful for everyone. And that's another thing to remember. Often people, again, get caught up in, oh, I don't want to give special treatment. I think if we keep thinking of it as removing barriers and creating a more accessible, open and inclusive workplace, that is going to be really helpful. And it really does take the stigma away. So I think that businesses who do this and organizations that do this well, they do see less sickness absence, better relationships between line managers and staff, fewer grievances, fewer complaints, and please, don't stall on putting adjustments into place. I've seen this time and time again, that someone plucks up the courage or they're just starting a new job, they outline very clearly what they need, and then 8 weeks later they still don't have it. And it's deeply frustrating. And then, someone will complain, or there'll be someone in HR who's particularly anti-disability, or they don't understand it. And then they'll say, oh dear, this might be a capability case. Well, it can't be a capability case if someone doesn't have their workplace adjustments in operation, because how are they able to work? There are barriers in place for them. So that's a really important thing to think about. It makes sense for everyone. And of course, you can create a reasonable adjustment passport. These are just documents online, or they could be paper-based, where people record the adjustments they have and how they support them. So if they go and move on and they get a promotion and they have another line manager, it's all there, it's all documented, and things can be taken forward very easily. Please don't overcomplicate this. I think that's one of the key things. So remember to be open and ready to have this conversation. Don't ask for inordinate amounts of medical history, but have that open discussion. Don't overcomplicate things. It really doesn't have to be that difficult. Remember, the individual is an expert on how they feel and how the disability is impacting them, whether it's a long-standing from birth or it's an acquired disability. They may not know exact equipment that they need, but help them to explore that. We are so lucky in the UK, the number of third sector organisations that work to support people with various conditions. Have a talk to them, have a look at the Access to Work scheme from the DWP, which is all about supporting disabled people in work and can provide grants to workplaces. And I'll put the link in the show notes. And common sense can and should prevail. So remember, it's about the connection, it's about the relationship, it's about building trust. And attitudinal barriers are a really big barrier that people face. And don't try and shoehorn someone in or say, I know exactly what you're going through. You don't, and that's fine. But what you can say is, I'm here to listen and we can work on this together. Absolutely, you need to have the same opportunities as members of staff who don't experience your disability or don't experience barriers in the way that you do. So I really hope you found this useful, practical information for you to take forward in and beyond Disability History Month. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcast from, and can leave a review. And some podcast episodes to also connect to this one. Episode 16 with Steph Cutler, the CEO of Making Lemonade, and she talks about Disability History Month and getting involved in the movement. Episode 21 with the wonderful Kate Nash, who is, of course, the CEO and founder of Purple Space, all about disability staff networks and disabled staff, so how staff networks shape the culture. Episode 88 with Richard Kramer, the wonderful CEO of Sense, talking sense for deaf awareness. And last week's episode, Universal Design and why it's so important. So that's a lot of information, and I hope that's been useful to you. And I will see you in the next episode, where we're going to be talking to Parastro Kalandri about weaving heritage into fashion. So until next time, take care.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.